With ProfileView, you can show role tracking information on top of a profile. So in this case, I have my relational database here that's keeping track of where all my reels and their subdivided sets and roles are going. So underneath here, I have different sets and different roles with some kind of information recorded about them. Perhaps where they went to, what their status was. And we find it very useful to overlay this on top of the profile. So you can look back in history and see what was going on for different reels at different times. So over here in my profile, I can see that I have some underlying set of information, in this case, the basis weight. And on top of that, I have a thing called the trim. If I zoom out a bit, you can see it. I've subdivided my profiles, or my profile, into reels, and then further subdivided it into sets, and then further subdivided that into roles. As I click around, I can get different information about it, such as which reel I'm in, which role I'm in, and what the quality is. All right, let's see how to configure this. I'll start off with a new display, and I'll show first just a basic set of tags. In this case, some basis weight tags. I'll name it basis weight, and I get my profile. Now, there's one other thing we want to do before we get to that trim overlay, and that's which type of profile this is. We could select continuous, that would work, but what would be more powerful in this case is a reel/batch type tag. So this means, and you'll notice when I select these, the tabs on top change, that I get some different information about how it's displayed over here on the right hand side and how it's divided. At different times, different reels are being produced. And if I have a tag that keeps track of which reel is being produced at which time, I can put it in right here. And when I click on different parts of my profile, the different reel will come up. I can also put in the elapsed distance tag down here. And I can also put in some kind of name for my reels. Some format that will just be repeated. So in this case, I'll just use PM1 dash and 6 and 30. Okay. So now when you see it, as I click around on my profile, off here on the right hand side, the name of the reel that I'm in at any one time changes. So I can tell, well, this one was from J0202 and this one was from J0201. Okay. Next we'll want to overlay our trim. We do this by adding another profile. We're going to call this the trim. Now the type here is now going to be an overlay. It's a trim overlay. When we get into reel/batch, this is actually, this configuration is how the relational database is queried. You'll notice that we don't have an array tab, so there's no PI tags that are driving what's happening with the trim overlay. It's all information brought in from the relational database. So it's important that we configure this right, otherwise when we query the relational database, it won't recognize what name we're asking for. Next on the trim and role tabs, this is where we give it information about which relational database it's going to go query. By default, if you leave it blank, it'll automatically query the file that's created when you install ProcessBook. That file can be fed by a simulator, but in your case, you'll probably be using a real database. In that case, you can configure ProfileView to look at that database, or you can have your database export to the file that ProfileView looks at by default. When I say OK, I'll see that the trim comes in. You'll see these boxes down here. However, it's not on top of my other profile. I want it to actually be overlaid. So that's what happens on this overlay tab. I can tell it I want trim to be overlaid over all other profiles. Great. So now trim is overlaid on top of it. I can see different reels and the different sets and roles within each one. I can also see defect spots that are stored in my relational database. The last thing we want to show you about the trim overlay is that when you have a reel/batch type tag configured, you can do some special calculations. So here, I want to do a calculation, and before we showed that you can do a calculation based on a scan, which is perhaps an average of an entire row of data. So at one time, the average of all tags. A column, which is perhaps the average or the calculation of some type of one tag over all time shown. A region, which is the entire screen. But now we have the option called real batch, which is the average or some calculation over an entire reel. So if I say OK, I say this is a real average. I can see real average over there. As I select anywhere within one reel, it stays the same, but if I go to a different reel, I'll get a different average. Okay, in this video we showed how to take a relational database information of role tracking information and overlay it on top of ProfileView. You can see particular defects, you can see where individual reels and roles are, and you can also do calculations based on reels at different times.